We want to talk about the big information, kind of the hurricane of headlines that came out of the White House yesterday with the presidential pardon of a man once called America's toughest sheriff. To some, former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio is a crusading anti-illegal immigration hero dedicated to protecting our borders. Others say he is the nemesis of America's Latino community who terrorized the people of Arizona during his tenure. Now, after a racial profiling lawsuit, a judge ordered Sheriff Arpaio to stop detaining Latinos he suspected of being undocumented immigrants when they hadn't been charged with a crime. Now, the Justice Department found that Arpaio ignored the court order and convicted him in contempt of court. And President Trump pardoned Arpaio for that conviction last night. So the conviction came on July 31st. Earlier this week, it was the president in Phoenix kind of teasing up a pardon coming for the former sheriff. But joining me now in Phoenix is Arpaio's attorney, Jack Wilenchik. Jack, good to have you with me. And let me ask, the Washington Post has done a kind of a deep dive into some of the background story of how this pardon may have come to be, with the president reaching out to AG Sessions saying that it would be inappropriate to do so and letting it run its course, which it had. But at what point did your client, the former sheriff, understand that this potential pardon could come?
Well, the president has been talking about it very publicly for at least the last couple of weeks. You could say, you know, he's been telegraphing the punch pretty hard. There was a rally, as we all know, earlier this week in which he spoke about it directly, even though it was sort of unexpected. And so we've had a very firm idea since at least last week when he spoke on Fox and Friends, and he tweeted out his own appearance, and then earlier this week when he spoke at the rally. So I myself got the call later in the day on Friday, yesterday, about the pardon from White House counsel. And of course the first question was, will the sheriff accept the pardon? There's actually, you know, a couple examples in history of people who rejected one for various reasons. So I said, well, absolutely, he'll accept one. And after that, it was emailed on to me, and I saw an actual copy of it. It's a full and unconditional pardon of the sheriff for not just that conviction, but for any other potential charges arising out of the Melendrez case, which is the case you were referring to earlier.
So, Jack, has the president called Sheriff Arpaio directly about this? Do you know if they've discussed it?
My understanding is there have been no direct communications between the sheriff and the president. I had the one call with White House counsel, and my understanding is that the sheriff was also contacted by White House counsel last week to, again, confirm he'd accept the pardon. But other than that, there has been no direct contact, and certainly no direct contact between the president and Sheriff Joe.
The Washington Post is reporting, though, that your fellow colleague, lawyer on the case, Mark Goldman, wrote to Don McGahn after the Phoenix rally, saying that he would hope that this pardon would come quickly and before sentencing, because it would place the sheriff in an untenable and unprecedented position. Did you ever advise your client about appealing the conviction? If he believes he's innocent, why not fight it?
That's a great question, and we have fought it. We've actually filed an appeal to the Ninth Circuit in the middle of the case to try to get him a jury trial. And we spent a lot of money and time trying to do that. It wound up with judges who basically said, you know what, wait until the end of the case. We don't want to hear it right now. We appealed that to the Supreme Court because there's law out there that says if what you're asking for is a jury, the courts have to look at that. They have to review that issue and give you a jury if you're entitled to one. So the answer is we've spent a lot of time and money on appeals. And the judge, unfortunately, refused to give him a jury, even though he asked at least 4 or 5 times. So the answer is the sheriff's not a young man. He's 85 years old. If the judge wanted to, she could sentence him and make him serve a potential sentence or pay a fine, even before we appeal. In which case, an appeal, really, you know, what's the point? So it's a lot more time and money that the government would have to spend, and that, you know, my client would have to spend for my time. So at this point, it's the right thing to do because the president is a check on the system, whether people like it or not. That's what the Constitution contemplated for the president.
But a lot of people would push back on that, Jack, about saying, you know, whether or not, however old he is, that probably was not on, you know, his brain when he was detaining people or potentially violating their constitutional rights in service of his position. That was probably not a calculation that went through his brain. Isn't this kind of an unparalleled situation where we have the president going out of his way to pardon someone only after their conviction roughly 20-plus days ago, without an appeal process actually formally sought. Why would you advise your client to accept the pardon?
Well, there's a couple questions there before you. I'll answer your last question first, which is, at this point, as I say, it saves everybody time and money. It's the right thing to do. The president is acting as a check on the system. But you mentioned something there about how he's an older man and that you know, people who were detained weren't showing that kind of sympathy, basically. You know, to people who question what's going on here, I invite them to really dig into what this case was about. It wasn't about racial profiling. There's a lot of misinformation about that. This was a conviction for defying an order that said that the sheriff's office cannot enforce federal immigration law, that they were no longer deputized as federal immigration officers. They had been, but President Obama's administration took that away. And when the sheriff's office got that order, they didn't understand it because they felt like, well, we can still work with the federal immigration officers to enforce immigration law. It was a very vague and ambiguous order. So, you know, it's an oversimplification to say this is just about people being detained in violation of the civil rights or racial profiling. This is really about clear orders to law enforcement and making it clear to them what they're supposed to do. And when it's not clear, it sort of creates this problem where at the end of the day they can get accused of contempt or criminal contempt, and they wind up in front of a judge without a jury who, it's like trying crime to the victim, you know, trying a contempt of court case to a court. It's not a fair trial.
But a lot of people might push back on that, Jack, and say that Sheriff Arpaio acted as judge and jury for so many. How is this a proper form of our criminal justice system serving itself for someone who says that they are an advocate and a lawman? Again, if he believes he's innocent, why not fight it? So many people would say, judicial scholars, a pardon is really an admission of guilt.
It's a great question because when a pardon comes to this point in the case, it undoes the effect of the conviction. It's just like if the defendant dies in the middle of a case. It basically moots out the case, meaning it's as if he was never convicted. And that is the effect of the pardon here. It's not, he is not guilty, so to speak, in the eyes of the law as a result of this pardon. And what I say is, at the end of the day, a pardon is a part of the system. It is a constitutional check. And I think what we're hearing is the president has been following this case, and he never believed it was right to even prosecute the sheriff, and that the conviction was wrongful.
When we think about what this means for the former sheriff, also the fact that he has kind of teased at an interest in returning to politics, do you think your client's going to do that?
That's a great question for him. I know, we all know the sheriff loves to get out there and talk to the press, and I know he'll be having a press conference very soon. And obviously those plans are up to him, but at this point I've done my job as best I can as a defense attorney, and this week we'll be filing a motion to dismiss the case.
Jack, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and all of this, and it really has been a fast 24 hours when we think about how quickly this is all kind of shaped up. Jack Wilenchik, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Joe Arpaio's attorney. Coming up next, we take you to Rockport, Texas.